and I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
We had a note on there about biochar radically improving the amount of water that was available to plants. How's that to happen?
So, well, biochar is a form of soil organic matter. So biochar is charcoal that's produced for the purpose of putting it into soil, and it's used just like compost. So you produce compost to add to the soil, to give it, to breathe life into it. It's material for the microbes to eat, and while the microbes are eating the compost, they convert nutrients into forms the plants can take up. But also that soil carbon holds water, and it adds a sort of time release effect to any nutrients, whether it's chemical nutrients or organic nutrients or manures. The more organic matter you have in soil, I mean, to a reasonable point, it keeps the water and the nutrients right there in the topsoil where the plant roots are longer. And just like people or any other animals, they can only eat and drink so much at one time. So it's really important to ration water and nutrients out to plants over as long a period of time as possible. And to keep the moisture level in the soil in that sweet spot that's in the graph that I showed between wilting point, freely drained, saturated soil.
50 years ago, I read an article in the Herald about biochar and its high productivity for dairy because of the peat content of the valley. It was also pointed out by the writer that they have a lot of floods in that area because they had cut all the hills, tree cover off the hillsides in that area. I'm just wondering what peat is a very biological material and biochar, how they interrelate in terms of holding the water retention but also being productive. Can you add any more, or am I?
Peat is a great substance for growing plants in. Whether the peat is in a farm field or whether it's in a container for in a greenhouse, peat is wonderful because it is organic and it holds water, and it holds water right in that sweet spot. And biochar can have a similar effect. Like if you have a soil and then you add biochar to it, or you add peat to it, they're both forms of organic matter. But the difference is that biochar, because it's charcoal, it doesn't rot away, it doesn't break down biologically, whereas peat breaks down very fast biologically. Microbes consume it, and it's also it's also lost by mechanically tilling the soil. And so peat is a wonderful substance for growing plants in, but it's finite. And peat stocks around the world are declining because it's so great for agriculture, but it's being consumed at a much faster rate than it can be produced. So organic soils peat soils are they're great, but they can also pose challenges when it comes to some nutrients like nitrogen flowing quickly into groundwater from topsoil. So peat soils are great, but they definitely have challenges attached to them.
Can I just say something? I think worldwide there's a lot of pressure of people reducing or stopping using peat because it's destroying the environment. It's very bad for releasing carbon into the soil, and it's bad for the climate. It's very destructively well, and I don't know if New Zealand's bad, but over places like Europe, they're really trying to discourage people using peat in the garden and potting mixes and things like that.
Yeah, so that issue is related to peat for home gardening, where peat is literally mined out of the ground and then bagged and sold to home gardeners. And the issue in the Waikato is a little different because that's the farm fields are peat soil. But in a way, the issue is the same, because just like the soils are being dug up and hauled away for home gardener use, every time the soils are turned over or plowed and animals are walking on them, the soil the peat out in the fields is being degraded and broken down too. But that's not unique to peat soils. Soils are being lost worldwide at an unprecedented scale, and it's really especially important for New Zealand, because globally New Zealand is the last major landmass on Earth to be populated by people. So that means it's the last big chunk of land that was converted into agriculture, because that's what people do everywhere we go. And so it seems like the perfect place to start to really get sustainability in line because of the history.
So, what is the biochar? What does it look like, and how do you apply it to land? Is it like a powder form, or?
Oh yeah, biochar. It comes as it's a fine powdered charcoal, and it's almost like dust, and it can be applied, and it's usually just applied exactly like somebody would apply compost, and I love biochar, but in the context of today's talk, it's really it's one tool in the toolbox, and if the environment is an engine, you definitely need a fully equipped toolbox and use the right tool for the right job. And in some cases, biochar might be the perfect thing to use, and in other cases, just reducing too much of a good thing can be the proper choice.
Charles, last time you spoke to us, you actually bought some samples of biochar and you said you were hoping to actually market it.
Yeah.
Are you actually doing that now? Or is it just to farms?
Yeah, it's really to farms and to different industry customers. I know biochar's time is coming for public demand, and so really I decided to kind of shift focus to this project that I've been working on, while public awareness about biochar increases. I think
And most of us are home gardeners, I think, here, mostly small property. How much biochar would you say put? I know this is what the businesses, but say for a square metre, because most of us would be operating about that.
I mean, through like lab testing, I could give you a very specific answer, but for general purposes, I'd say a layer 2.5 centimeters thick on top of the soil, and then mix that in either with a rake or just with your fingers, depending on how big the plot is, and that's really just to keep it from blowing away. But
Now, most biochar, they recommend it should be, it's allowed, combined with organic nutrient or so, because if you put biochar straight into the soil, it could actually take up and hold on to nutrients in the soil, lock them away from plants.
yeah. So that's called nutrient immobilization, and it can happen whenever a carbon-rich substance is applied. So compost, biochar, wood chips, various mulches, can all have that same effect. But it's not really a negative. So what happens is when you apply a carbon-rich substance to the soil microbes consume both carbon and nitrogen, and they consume carbon and nitrogen in a specific ratio. So when you apply a bunch of biochar or compost or wood chips, the microbes say, oh, great carbon source, and they start eating it. But then they need to eat some nitrogen with that carbon in order for their bodies to process it. So that nitrogen that they need to eat with the carbon is temporarily locked up inside the body of the microbe while it's alive. But microbes don't live very long. So when the microbes die, that nitrogen and the carbon is released back into the soil. So if a soil is managed properly, that issue of nitrogen, not being available can actually be an advantage, because it can the microbes consuming the nitrogen can kind of ration it out over the course of the season, because usually nitrogen its presence in the environment is fleeting, and that's why it's such a problem in some places where the soil conditions allow nitrogen and water to drain very quickly from the topsoil into the groundwater, and when it's a big issue for human health and environmental health to keep nitrogen where the plant roots can take it up. So adding biochar and compost, even though it can temporarily take nutrients away, it's really not something I would worry about in a home garden situation. Generally, the more organic matter of any kind that you can get in your soil, the better. I mean, up to an extreme point.
I put biochar usually through the worm farm, and but I have put biochar, but I also put wood ash in charcoal.
Yeah, wood ash is full of nutrients, and it's wood ash it's interesting because charcoal is inert carbon generally. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. Doesn't really break down. But ash is the complete opposite. Ash is full of plant available nutrients and is not present in the soil very long. It's really analogous to a chemical fertilizer in how potent it is and how fleeting its presence is. It'll wash away after a certain period of time. But Sorry, my hearing isn't very good.
The old school mindset
Yeah,
that just wants to keep on doing it the same way that I was in.
yeah, and it's, yeah, that's exactly it. It's about just transitioning everybody towards getting everybody on the same page, because even anyone can recognize that inefficiency is bad, inefficiency is good, and the divisions that people invent in society of I'm in this group and I'm not in that group, so I don't care about what that group thinks. That's nature really doesn't care. What we think it should be doing, I think increasingly all industries are adopting more sustainable practices, especially when they can point to hard numbers about this is the positive result of the management decisions that we made, whether it's a single farm or a region or a country or a global industry. If we can get sustainability measured from the ground up, literally, then that data can, I think that's what should drive choices in every industry going forward. There's a lot of talk about commitments to sustainability and a lot of posturing in the world, and that's all good, and it's a good place to start, but it won't really prove itself effective unless there are hard numbers to show that the world's getting on the right track environmentally, and I think
It's not just greenwashing.
we all have different priorities and things that we're personally concerned with, but sustainability really transcends all groups, and I think if we can, and the world's doing this, or at least starting to move towards prioritizing not simply profitability, but profitability and sustainability, which can be as warm and cuddly or as unemotional and detached economically as someone prefers.